Good morning, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to watch us talk. I think some more people will be coming in as we go, so I'll try to keep this beginning a little bit slow to let people come in. SWET is a society of writers, editors, and translators. There's a lot of people from different points of their career that are involved with SWET. It's a great casual organization if you just want to get to know people and talk to other people. We also have a special interest group specifically for manga involved as a part of SWET. So this is like an extension of the manga special interest group. So this is the general agenda for today. This is a 2-hour panel. So first we're just going to have a short intro for all the panelists. Then we're going to talk about what do we mean by manga localization in Japan, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then we've divided everything into 6 different questions to shape the conversation. This will be a chat between Amy, Melanie, and myself, and hopefully it'll be easy for people to understand the industry. And also, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat and we could try to talk about them in the last 30 minutes or so. Thank you. And then we will move on to panelist intros. So, Melanie.
Okay, hi, thank you, Emma, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Melanie, and I work at Takeshobo's Overseas Sales Department. Takeshobo is a book and manga publisher in Japan. I previously worked at Animate International as an editor and translator for 3 years, probably closer to 4 years. And I also have experience adapting light novels at Seven Seas. And I also have experience interpreting live stream events for Pixiv and hosting a YouTube series for Kadokawa. Thank you very much again for joining us today. And I guess next Amy can introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Amy. Thank you all for joining us. For those who follow Renta, I might be better known as Ames, since that's my alias for all of our social media accounts. The photo on my slide is my lovely daughter, Togarashi, also known as Ton-chan. I've been employed by the English branch of Papulus Global for around 5 years now, and I've been the localization team leader for 2. All localization team members, myself included, originally started as translation and quality checkers. I have an in-house staff of 5 working under me, and also am in charge of the robust freelance staff, which handle thousands of pages per month. As a lifelong fan of BL, boys love manga. While our marketing team runs our other socials, I'm also the head of all the BL accounts with the rest of our wonderful BL team. I'm also the only foreign staff in an elevated position, so I head the market research and brand invigoration teams. I originally hail from Minnesota in the US, so shout out to any fellow Midwesterners in the audience, if there are any. I actually went back to school later in life, initially with the intention of working as a publisher after working a lot of like retail positions and odd jobs. But somehow now I spend my days discussing the best way to convey erotic sound effects with my coworkers. As previously noted, I'm technically an employee of Papulus, which is the Honsha, as they call it, the parent company. One thing that you learn quickly working in Japan is that companies within companies, et cetera, is very common here. So I consider myself a staff of Renta, which is a subsidiary of Papulus Global, which is a subsidiary of Papulus. Papulus was actually the first ever digital reading platform in Japan, even before the Kindle. As you can see by the logos up here, Renta is available in Japanese, of course, also Taiwanese, and then, of course, it's also available in English, or I wouldn't be here. As you can see on the slide, our logo is the only one that's a different color, and that's to suit the fact that we have more nuke, or like female-oriented branding. Renta originally started almost 14 years ago as a localization company and a platform oriented toward erotica, since most Western manga companies were very focused on male audiences. So we figured that was a niche we could fill. Over time, as our BL catalog grew and we gained more traction, we slowly became a more BL-oriented company, but we still try to have a niche balance between TL, shoujo, and BL manga. Also, one thing that I think is a bit confusing for some of our users, are we a publisher or are we a platform? We're both. We actually handle, as I said previously, thousands of pages per month of our own localizations, but we also host content from other localizers and publishers who kindly allow us to showcase their manga on our platform. All right, and then I think Emma's next.
Oh, yeah. Hi, my name is Emma Hanashiro. I am the managing editor at Manga Planet. Job titles are more of a thing in English. We don't have we have to make up job titles. I think this might be talked about later. We have to make up our job titles when we talk to people on the English-facing front. Managing editor was like a title that we made to talk to people in English, but within the office, I'm just an employee. I am an employee at FANTASISTA Inc., which is a CG animation company, but I'm also working with Dai Nippon Printing, a DMP to help lead up a lot of the localization projects and also bring titles that are on Manga Planet into print. I also am, as mentioned before, involved with SWET. So I helped with a couple other members pull together the special interest group for manga. And I also tried to pull together, outside of SWET, meetups for people who work in the manga localization industry in Tokyo. And if everybody happens to be in the Tokyo area, feel free to let me know, and you're welcome to any of our meetups. And then to talk about Manga Planet, so much like Venta, we are both a licensor, so we license titles as well as a platform. So we take on like titles from like Kodansha, other places. We allow like titles from other companies onto our platform so people could read it. So we are a digital online manga reading platform. We have a subscription-based system along with an individual purchase system, so you could purchase mangas by chapter or volume. And then starting in 2023, we started printing our titles. And so we have currently 9 titles, 8 titles in stores, and then 1 title that we've announced this year coming out, I think sometime in April, actually. So the bottom photo has some of the titles that we're working on to bring into print. So that's for my end. So I guess those are all the introductions. And then to clarify, this event has to do with manga localization in Japan specifically. I think currently for manga in English, we have a lot of publishers that are based in America, along with a lot of companies based in Japan. And so I think I've divided into 3 sort of points. I'm going to ask Melanie and Amy also to fill in any additional details as well. But generally speaking, when we're talking about manga localization in Japan, we're talking about a publisher or licensor that's based in Japan. They might have offices in the United States as well, but all the actual work is done within Japan. So how Amy, Melanie, and I all live in Japan, that's because we're involved in the Japan office side. There could be a mix of in-house staff, so all of us were in-house staff working with freelancers agencies to create the manga into English. And then for the most part, we tend to have a very digital focus, so Rent is a digital platform, as is Manga Planet. But I think I put an asterisk there because print is becoming a sort of bigger point, much like how Animate International started for digital, and now they have print titles as well. Melanie, Amy, did you have any other details you wanted to add in terms of how should we conceptualize localization in Japan?
I guess that's probably good. I guess to add on to the publishers and licensors based in Japan too, as Emma said, the fact that we were working at the Japanese company, the Japanese base in Japan. So generally speaking, it's like a smaller group of foreigners within the larger Japanese company. So there's a lot more pressure from the Japanese side and stuff. So that's one thing that we have to think about a lot.
We do interface a lot more with the Japanese office side. I guess also we also might interact a little bit more with the Japanese publishers because we're just closer. We tend to have a little bit more communication with the Japanese publishers potentially. I mean, I think with Animate, you guys were like, Libre is part of Animate, so.
Yeah, Animate International's kind of purpose was to create English versions of manga from other Animate group companies. So that meant we only licensed from Libre and Frontier Works, which are Animate group companies. So that was, yeah, we were very close. So that's why, yeah, we chose those 2 companies to license manga.
Yeah. Oh, also, you work at a Japanese publisher now.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So you are interfacing quite directly with, let's see. Oh, I see. So I'm reading the Square Enix. Yeah, I'm also unsure about how it works with other Japanese publishers. Like, this is answering Sarah Tangi's comment about how Square Enix manga communicates with the Japanese side. I think it depends on the American publishers how much they interface with the publisher side. I know, at least for Manga Planet futekiya things, when we license titles, I sometimes actually go into the office to talk with the licensing person directly to clarify what the audiences are looking for and what exactly we're doing. So I think that's a potential point of difference. But yeah, that's what we mean by manga. It's just physically speaking, we are in Japan and we work for Japanese companies. So that's to contrast with the American side, where it's American-based publishers licensing from Japanese publishers. But the staff, I think, in American publishers tend to be in America, but also like all over as well. So yeah, that's just the clarification point. And so now we are moving on to the larger discussion questions. So the first discussion question is, how did you guys enter the industry? I think that's a question people always seem to be curious about. Amy, Melanie, if any of you want to start.
I guess I'll start because I have the least experience, because Renta is really my only, I don't know, touch with actually going in the industry, but it is the two questions together. So I'll, instead of saying the whole story of how I got into the industry, I'll just start with the initial part. As I said in my introduction, I've always been a fan of BL manga. I'm not sure how many people in the audience don't necessarily know what it is, but BL manga is boys love manga, which is essentially romance manga among, that's like between two males, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like a full romance manga. It could be an action manga where the romance is a subplot. It could be like anything like that. But essentially, since I was like 11, years old, I have been like very passionate about BL manga. So essentially, my first touch with the industry is that when I was in my late teens, I started, in order to help myself like learn Japanese, I started buying a ton of BL manga off of Amazon. On those shipping prices. But as soon as I got my first job, that's all I wanted to do was buy BL manga and read them. And so I started a blog, and at the end of the day, that blog actually took off, and it got me a lot of networking opportunities with other people who were very passionate about manga. It's also was my doorway when I was finishing up school, because I finished up school later in life. And I happened to be in Japan at the time on a student visa when I was graduating. And my friend just so happened to also be switching out of this job. So because I had met her through that blog, and she knew that I was incredibly passionate about BL manga, she was like, I know the perfect job for you. And then went to HR and was like, I know the perfect person for this position. Yeah, so that was my first touch. It was just being so passionate about BL that I wanted to write about it nonstop.
Nice. Wow.
Yeah, then I guess I'll answer the question as well then. Yeah, I think Amy's story is like really interesting because she purposely went to enter the manga industry, whereas I didn't intend to enter the manga industry when I started working at Animate International. I worked at Animate International for 4 years in total, and for the first 6 months, it was just doing random English-related work for Animate Group companies. Like I mentioned earlier, I had interpreted for Pixiv. Pixiv's also an Animate Group company, so it was doing work for all kinds of companies within the Animate Group. And then one day, 6 months into my job, my boss was like, "Hello, English speakers, you're going to make manga in English." And it was like, oh, okay, nobody at the office. At the time, I was the only native English speaker. And I'm like, I've never made a manga in my life. What do you want us to do here? But then he hired 2 more native English speakers, and we all were trying to figure it out together because none of us had a lot of experience making English versions of manga. So there was a lot of trial and error for the first 6 months when we were trying to get these English versions out. And yeah, it was a lot. But when I started working at Animate International, it wasn't to work on manga. That just happened. But like Amy, I'm a fan of BL manga as well. I was like really passionate to make the best versions of these comics that I could. And yeah, I think it worked out. Animate International, I think, has a cult following, I guess I would say, because yeah, we focused on BL manga, which is already a niche, and we would only release like 2 books every month when I was there. And I worked really hard on those books, editing them over and over. And I think people really picked up on the love and quality, not just from me, but from all of our translators and typesetters. And yeah, I think I'm getting off topic, but when I got my job, I wasn't applying for a job in manga localization. Yeah. How about you, Emma?
I was a big fan of BL manga. I'm sure a lot of people who work in the industry do. But I did my senior thesis on BL manga, actually, the history and the conceptualization of and things like that. It wasn't a very good senior thesis, but it was something I was really interested in when I was in college. And I thought about going to grad school. So I went to a language program in Japan to prepare potentially for grad school. And while I was at that language program, I talked to a couple professors who work in that area, and they told me not to go to grad school. As a result, I had just a lot of background knowledge about manga. I had also done a lot of internships related to anime. I worked at an anime like film distribution company in college. I worked at Anime News Network for a little bit as an intern. I even worked at like Digital Manga Inc. I think that's what they were called at the time, as like a translation intern. So I did a lot of different internships around manga. And so I was really interested in learning more about it. Not necessarily working as like a translator, but somebody who could support the production and spread of manga. So while I was in Japan, I found a job posting that they just said they needed somebody to run the English blog. So Manga Planet started off as basically just like a random blog by a CG animation company that had a shacho that was a company president that was really interested in manga. And so I was just hired on as like a English speaker and an editor basically for the blog. And at the time they're like, we would like to think about how we could make a manga service. And so I was really involved in like the sort of early days of conceptualizing a subscription-based situation along with focusing on BL manga. So I guess that I just entered the industry through a lot of different job experiences that sort of led to becoming an editor and working at my current company. I think I forgot to add in my slide, but I've been at the same company for 7, almost 8 years now. So I don't actually have that much experience with other different companies, but just been sticking out at the same place for a long time. So yeah, I guess that's how I entered the industry, is just got a lot of different internships in college and then just a chance job opening. And I think this sort of relates to, this is a question actually I wanted to ask Melanie because it's interested me, but I think the second question is like really connected to the first question, like how you entered the industry. How did you actually like, get your current job? I think Amy mentioned she got her current job just through networking, like knowing somebody who worked at Populous at the time. Melanie, how is it okay to ask how you found like your current position at Takeshobo?
Yeah, sure. I literally just saw an online ad for it. It was not really an exciting story about how I got hired at Takeshobo. I just saw a listing. Takeshobo was looking for somebody to do like exactly what I had been doing at Animate International. And I chose to go to Takeshobo because Animate International, I've spoken, I'm not sure how familiar the people watching are with Japan's like otaku industry, but Animate Group, like I've mentioned that several times, but Anime Group's biggest company is Animate, which is a goods retailer in Japan. If you're looking for anime merch or CDs or whatever, that kind of thing, you're going to go to Animate. So Animate itself, their main focus is like more goods. And Animate International, the company, was more focused on importing and exporting goods. I was like the outlier. I was like making manga, whereas like all the people around me in the office are like trying to import like the latest engines, like a Chinese game. Yeah, Genshin goods or like alien stage goods. So the people around me are all focused on import from their countries, like Anime International, right? It was all international people working there. And then I was just like, I have to make this BL manga. Let me zoom in on this like 18 up scene where you guys are like focusing on like, where's your boat? So it just felt, I don't know. If I had the chance to go work at Takeshobo, which is like a book publisher, I'm like, okay, like they literally want me to do the same thing I've been doing at Animate, make English versions of their BL manga. So okay, yeah, I'll do that for you, Takeshobo. And yeah, it seems to be going okay so far. I don't know.
Yay. Great. I guess also when they generally hire the checkers, the people who work in-house, they usually just put out like a job posting on Dai Job or something like
Yeah. What's the like really popular one for foreigners? That's the one that I used. And at first because my Japanese was not very good when I applied for the position, I had just gaijin pot, thank you.
Oh, Gaijin Pot. There we go.
But I had just graduated university, but because I was a fool and did all of my Japanese courses in the US already, I couldn't do Japanese courses that would actually apply to my degree in Japan. So I was in Japan taking English courses. So my Japanese was improving. And then was graduating, and at the end of it, I was like, if I want to stay in Japan, maybe I'll look at English teaching positions. It's usually the go-to. But my friend just happened to be leaving, and she was like, just so you know, the job's going to be posted on Gaijin Pot. And so I really quickly swooped in and applied to it completely in English. And I thought that was okay at the time because it's an English subsidiary. Surely it's fine. No, the hiring staff are completely in Japanese. The like shacho, bucho, everyone is Japanese. They're not going to read your English resume. So I had to like rush to create, what is it, like Nirekisho and
the sort of more extensive like CV version.
the two like intensely Japanese resumes And I had to have my Japanese friends sit down with me for 3 hours straight, like editing it and being like, okay, what can we add? What can we add? And I got the interview.
Mhm.
And the first interview was a disaster. I remember going home and being like, I did not get that.
Oh, really?
Because I got too nervous and then I forgot all of my Japanese. But then the unbelievably lovely HR person emailed me 2 days later and was like, we would like to invite you for the second interview.
Oh,
Like, I don't know. Okay. Thank you.
I'm glad it worked out. Oh yeah, yes, that is yes. The Sarah has shared in the chat the manga, the CV. So there's like you do have the Takeshobo, which has a very like brief overview of like your schooling, education, job history, and then there's the Shokumu, which is it has like the job position as well as like, sometimes information about the company that you work in, along with more in depth what you did at each job. For people who are interested in working in Japan, those tend to be the two documents that you need when applying for jobs. I mentioned how I entered the industry, how I got my current job, much like Amy and Melanie. A lot of the jobs aren't necessarily, there are jobs that you get through networking. I think a lot of the translation positions, like lettering and things like that, do tend to be sometimes knowing somebody could help put you connection with like editors. But for in-house positions, they do tend to post them online. And so that's how, I mean, my position wasn't listed as what it would be currently. It changed over time. And I think when I first applied, it was actually through a recruiter. So a recruiter held my hand through the entire process. It was an unusual situation that the recruiter actually sat next to me during all of my interviews. I would have a pre-talk. She would pump me up before the interviews, and then like a recap to say like how the interview went afterwards and things like that. So like it was a very recruiters like in Japan can be hit or miss, I think, but this specific recruiter was actually very good, and she helped me get this job and also helped me like negotiate for a salary raise as well when I first entered the position. So it's unusual, but I guess for the most part, like in-house positions, they're just gonna list it online and just keeping a good eye on the different job listings. Like in the chat, we have Gaijin Pot, Career Cross, Dai Job. What is it? Something Kyujin. Was it Kyujin Box? I think is another like very common job listing site. Indeed also tends to have a lot of things as well in Japan now. That's the how did we get the job, just for folks who are thinking about working in Japan. I think I should have prefaced at the beginning, like this talk is also like very oriented for if people are interested in working in Japan. This is like a such a good conversation. So what is the best part of your job? And what is the most challenging aspect of your job?
I don't know. For me, the best part is just making something that's good. I don't know. When you see the translation, usually at Animate International, what we would do is we would have the translation translated by like somebody, and I would check the translation, the editor, right? But even when you're just reading the script, you're just, I hope it's okay. You know what I mean? And you don't really know if it's going to work until you actually see it on the page. So the best part of my job is just like getting a good translation and then seeing it on the page, and you're like, oh my God, it's so funny. Oh, I'm gonna cry. It hits where it needs to hit. And then I don't know, that's the best part of my job, seeing something like come together that everyone worked really hard on, because it would really just be like a team of 3 people working on our manga. It would be the translator, the editor, me, and the typesetter. So it was always like a labor of love with just 3 people. The 3 of us are like, oh, I hope this is good. And when it comes together. And so that's the best part of my job. The most challenging part of my job is when it doesn't come together and you're like, what's wrong? Why is it bad? Especially the first maybe year and a half I was working Animate, I didn't have the kind of sense of, oh yeah, this translation is going to work or that typesetting is going to work. So I don't make a lot of changes that weren't quite what they needed to be, and I'd get the final version back and be like, no, I don't know, this may be like a bit too like minor of a topic for this portion of the talk, but like at Animate International, we would leave the Japanese sound effects and then just put like an English like stylized subtitle. So the English sound effect would be close to the Japanese version in a similar kind of font. And sometimes I'd be like, oh, move it here. And then like the typesetter would move it there. And I'd be like, oh no, it's so ugly now. I see why you didn't do that. Move it back. So I just didn't really have the kind of sense of what worked and what didn't. So that sucked. That was the most challenging part of my job, I think, was just getting to the skill level where I can be like, okay, I know what works and what doesn't now, and I can edit more effectively. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think that the fans of Anime International really appreciated all the hard work that went into it. A lot of hard work went into it. But yeah, that's my best part and worst part is just skill issues. What about you, Amy and Emma?
You want to go, Emma?
Oh, sure. I feel like for the past year we meet up on and off. And I do feel like we have very similar struggles, I think, just because even though we work at different companies, we tend to have like very common, I guess it comes with just working at an office. A lot of just figuring out how to work as a team, trying to like balance different priorities, especially with an international audience. So I guess specifically at my company, the hardest part tends to be like feeling alone. Sometimes I do feel like on the US side, there tends to be a lot more editors. I also know at other companies there tend to be a lot more editors, depending on the company. But at least at our company, we tend to have a very small staff, and so you do sometimes feel like alone, and it makes you like question a lot of things. You don't have a lot of people you could talk to. It feel isolating sometimes, just because you feel like so much pressure, and you don't really have a lot of people to talk to about it. So I guess that's possibly the hardest part is like the sense of being alone, I guess. I know for the first 2 years when I was working at Fantasista, I was actually the only like non-Japanese citizen at the company. So that was interesting, like working in an entirely like Japanese environment, like just Japanese coworkers and like nobody else who had a different like cultural background or things like that. So I think that was the hardest part. So I started with the hardest part. I should have started with the best part. The best part the best part is being able to like work on manga that I really like. I know I sometimes I when you're trying to pick licenses for things, you have to think about a lot of different factors. And I always have to challenge myself not to just choose 100% my taste of titles because that would not reflect the general audience. But being able to work on titles that you personally like yourself is really nice. So I think being able to do that in digital, and then now since we're moving in print titles, so one title that I was really excited to bring into print was Gaia Synchronicity. That was like a title I was really happy that we were able to first do the digital and then do the print as well. That was really the best part of the job, is like just seeing the end result after all that work. Thank you, see Natalie. I think another part is I mentioned in the previous slide, like localization. When you work at a Japanese companies, you do tend to work with a lot of agencies, which there's a lot of pluses, minuses when working with agencies. It still is a contentious topic now, agency rates especially. And at the very start for Manga Planet, we did work with agency, things like that. But over the past couple of years, after me being annoying inside of my office, we've started working more directly with freelance translators, letters, proofreaders, and things like that. And so being able to give people a job and being able to hire people is another huge positive. I think you guys might have mentioned that similarly. I think when we had a past conversation, being able to give people work is like a huge like positive.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then Amy, how are you feeling about the pluses and minuses of working?
Oh boy. I guess I'll start with the pluses because they go into some of the minuses. But the plus for me is obviously the biggest one is getting to work with content that I'm very passionate about. Like I said, for 2/3 of my life, if not more, oh God, more now. Ugh. I have like really loved this content and the community around it and everything like that. So it's like getting to be an advocate for a presence within that community is really important to me. And then plus as the leader, I can push for higher quality and I can push for more community outreach and more community involvement. And I really love that. Also, I get to read BL manga all day on two giant screens in the middle of my office. Like sometimes the council people come in to just see what we're up to. And I have this wonderfully disgusting scene like blasted out from my screen. And you got all these men in suits just walking by and I'm like, enjoy. Have fun, guys. And I guess connected to that is that I really love my team. It makes me feel bad saying this after Emma was talking about how like isolating it can feel. Because in a sense, I also agree that it can feel really isolating because we're just a small team too within the larger department. Larger department has like 20, 28 members. And we're just a team of about 6 foreign staff. And for the most part, we get on very well. There's no issues with that. But sometimes like there is the cultural aspect of it that no one really thinks about until it happens. And it's But that being said, my team of staff that I have in-house, like I couldn't do this without them. This job attracts a lot of weirdos in all the best ways. So I have this wonderful staff of open-minded people that we can have really open, bizarre conversations about topics that would be an HR report in any other company. And that's always really fun. And they're always there to have my back and there to be like, yeah, that is the case in Western audiences when I'm like, okay, am I crazy? Am I crazy? So those are definitely my two favorite parts. For the more challenging aspects, I guess I touched on it a bit, but the office politics of working for like a Japanese company. My company is actually not strict. Like I'm able to wear regular clothes. I don't have to like dress up really nice. We have wonderful flex time, so I can avoid the rush hour train. There's lots of wonderful things about working for my Japanese office. But that being said, I'm sure that anyone who's ever taken like a course on intercultural politics or intercultural communication knows that the Western side and Japan, they're like water and oil sometimes in the most frustrating ways. For instance, the fact that a lot of Japanese people are very conflict averse. So if something goes wrong, trying to be really nice and polite in the most intense keigo you can possibly muster, while also being like, you're wrong, stop it, is a bizarre thing. Because I always thought that I was really conflict averse and I was like, really, ooh, don't ever tell somebody if something's wrong, like you don't want to have a fight. But even for me, as somebody who's quite shy and quiet, even I'm like, come on, guys, let's just openly discuss this thing, please. So that can be a little bit frustrating, is just towing the line between the two cultures and trying to make sure that we're not just like clashing over really silly things, that we can just get everything ironed out. The other one is just the fact that it's tied to it, but it's straddling the line between the two different markets, because this is the same product in different markets that could not be more different in terms of how the customer reception is, what the market wants, what customer needs are, all of that kind of stuff. So it's like using Japanese marketing tactics and advertising styles and stuff doesn't work when you're orienting, toward a Western market. So that kind of thing too is trying to get everybody on the same page of being like, okay, let's try a more Western advertising style going forward. So those kind of things are also difficult. But I think, and I feel like Emma and Melanie can also attest to this one, the most challenging part of this job is that it's a passion industry. And it's very easy to give way too much of yourself to this job. I've been talked to by family and friends many a time about the sheer amount of overtime I work, because to me, it's fun overtime. Working on BL manga, I'm like writing tweets, I'm communicating with all of the people in the community. But even when you're having fun, your mind and body are still wearing down.
Yeah.
So that too is like when you go into a field that you feel very passionate about and you really care about, be careful. Please be careful. Yeah.
I think that applies to in-house staff, like freelance staff. I think it's really easy to feel like I am thankful to have my job, but not to let that make you feel like you're being taken advantage of, I guess. The fine line between being grateful for having the job but also working way too much, I guess, is like a difficult point, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was working at Animate International, I had multiple freelancers tell me, like, what time is it in Japan? Why are you awake? I know how time zones work. And I'm like, yeah, just because I don't know. I felt, as I mentioned, I was the one responsible for the manga. Essentially, if anything went wrong with the English version, it was going to be my fault if there were any typos or anything was wrong. So I would constantly be like checking it even like after hours. And it was very easy to lose yourself in this job. But yeah, like you said, Amy, it's like fun overtime and like I'm responsible. And you tell yourself those kind of things, but yeah.
Yeah, I think this ties into like later, like when we have advice for people who are thinking of the industry. Don't take your health for granted. It's easy to think that when you're young. I was much dumber than I am currently. Like when futekiya actually first launched in like 2019, that same year I got shingles and had to be hospitalized for 10 days. So don't work, like shingles is a stress-related thing. Don't work till you guys get shingles, guys. It's not worth it. It's not fun. It's not cool to have shingles in your 20s.
It's funny because it's like when the grind set bros, like the stereotypical like dudes who are like work 24/7, and I'm like, don't do that. Take care of yourself. Don't work 24/7. And I find myself working a 14-hour shift, and I'm like, am I the grind set bro? Was I the grind set bro all along?
Was the grind set bro inside of me this whole time? Yeah. Oh, let's see. Wynn's got a good comment here. Developing your work from passion to professional is a lifelong process, one that will help to achieve more satisfaction and a reputation that you could build long term. Yeah, it is a process, definitely. Thank you for the comment. Do you feel like the manga that the Japanese side wants to push, like Japanese side being like the Japanese like publishers versus what American audiences want? Do you think there's like a divide or a difference between that? I guess a touchy question, I think. I'm sorry.
It has been very difficult to convince because there was a short period where my company was more oriented toward going very Ippon. Ippon is like general audience, because there was this kind of idea that if we go Ippon, then intrinsically the audience is just wider. But I feel like Ippon is like such a scary direction to go in, because then choosing the right manga is so much more difficult. So it's like having to fight against that. And we eventually won the battle. I think everyone understands now that don't do that. Let's just stay on track now. But recently, some of the people, if anyone follows our Twitter or follows any of our socials, we had, I don't want to get sued, hopefully they won't watch this. We had a March Madness bracket, essentially, which pitted like BL tropes against each other. And so many people were under this idea that like Omegaverse would definitely win and Beast People will definitely win. And they don't realize that, okay, these are very popular tropes. Don't get me wrong, they're unbelievably popular. I also love them. But the Western audience is a lot more oriented toward kind of, how do I even phrase it? More story-ke, like story-oriented, yeah, much more so than the like hyper porn kind of content that is it's not much more common, but it's still very commonplace and still very popular in the Japanese market. So when the whole bracket and everything was done, everybody in my audience, except for our little table, was absolutely shook that Old Man Yaoi won. And why did it win? And it's, if you had been watching the market, not even like for the past 5 years, Old Man Yaoi has been the most popular by far. And I know this as somebody who is, I love like super hyper pretty twinks. I'm personally just not really interested in older guys. I'm so sorry. But even I knew this. But like the JP side, even though Oji-san is slightly popular in Japan, it's not that popular, but the West loves it. They love it. And so like finally doing this bracket was like a way to showcase to the JP side that, see, it's very different.
I hope the bracket like left an impression of, I don't know, showed actual
Yeah,
proof.
it was very fun.
Nice. I'm glad it looked fun. Like when I checked it out, it looked pretty fun. Yay. Oh yeah, let's see. Yeah, Old Man Yaoi, it is a very popular thing, but I do think there's a pretty cool. I think how Amy said she likes the younger tricks. I like crusty older characters. I love them crusty. I love them old, like all the problems that come involved with that. Perfect, like best. I'm sorry that all my family's here. I don't know if anybody knows this, but like half of my half of my aunts and uncles are watching this at the moment. I wanted to touch a little bit on AI. One of the challenges that's been happening. This is something I always wanted to ask Western publishers, but I guess it's at a different point. But I think because we're in Japanese offices, we get approached a lot more by AI manga translation companies and things like that. We see it much more closely, I think, just because it's happening a lot more actively in Japan. So I don't know if you guys wanted to throw in like it's happening or like we see it and it's a thing. We don't have to go too much into depth because I know like we are company employees and we have jobs, so we can't speak entirely super freely, but as much as we can say / would like to say, if anybody wants to say anything.
I guess I'll start. Thankfully, at both Animate and Takeshobo, there were people in the company that understood that AI for creative translation does not work. So at Animate International and both of the companies I've been working at, AI companies have approached us, but I've been like, no. I feel like it would be kind of like a waste of my time to check AI translations because these are like stories and they were made by humans, so they should be translated into different languages by humans. I can say that the companies I've worked at have never used AI in any attempts I was able to successfully rebuff. But there was a situation, like I mentioned, when Animate International first started making our English manga. Like, we just really didn't know what we were doing. So our first manga that we ever made, people accused us of AI translating it, where it was just a situation of we didn't know how to translate really well. So that was really upsetting to me because no, the script that had been translated, me and the other person in-house had sat there for hours going over it. And it just didn't come out good because neither of us had the skill at the time to make a good creative translation. For me, I've never worked with AI. God willing, I'll never have to work with AI translation. If I do, I think I would just quit or refuse to do it because I feel there's more value in working at a convenience store and serving other humans than like checking a translation done by a stupid robot. That's a creative translation. I'm sure there's a place for AI in some fields. Haha. But yeah, that's my opinion. What do you think, Amy?
I think one thing that I probably want to start out saying, Emma touched on it, is that AI in general is seen a lot more positively in Japan than it is in the West. I think in the West, maybe because the tide is slowly turning on tech bros, or just because AI is so obviously being used for a lot of like political propaganda and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot more negative feelings toward it. But for the most part of the Japanese people I've spoken to, maybe they just haven't been honest about their feelings on it. There is definitely that kind of cultural aspect of it, but it's seen much more positively. So if it works, why not use it instead of maybe respect the art form of manga and don't do this? So you have to constantly be on guard because there's tons of these companies starting up and like swarming to be like, we want to work with you. And it's no thanks. We're good, thanks.
Yeah.
And another issue that is really common, and thankfully at our company, we obviously have foreign staff that can step in and be like, guys, don't do this, is that it's often Japanese companies that are like fully Japanese pitching this idea of the AI English translation to other Japanese people in Japanese companies. So they don't necessarily realize what is wrong with the translation, because if it's robotic, if you will, translation, it doesn't really occur to non-native speakers because it's understandable, and that's the most important thing. But in an art form like manga, it's not about being understandable, it's about being enjoyable to read. So that's an issue that we run into frequently. But the AI is so fast. Yeah, but this is still a product that's being sold to a consumer. So at the end of the day, whether it's fast or not, you have to upkeep quality, especially since for a lot of publishers and localizers, our main, I don't even know if you'd call it competition, but something that is always in the back of our mind is scanlations. And so it's like, if you're going to just put something out through AI that people don't see as worth paying for, they're just going to read the scanlation. They'll just go to the scanlation aggregator or whatever you want to call it. So keeping quality is very important for this industry if you still want to stay afloat, because otherwise people will just lose the confidence in your company. So I think that's one thing that with the AI situation, you have to push and pull with a lot of Japanese people. So they're not going to fully understand why the translation is bad. And there's not quite the negative pushback in Japan against AI.
Yep, this is happening.
Yeah. I guess the one positive thing that I would say about AI is that it does have a place as a tool used by people, because it can help when you don't understand something and you don't really understand the nuance behind something. If you go to ChatGPT and type in, what's the nuance behind this Japanese phrase? It's a lot easier than having to Google word for word for word for word. And that kind of stuff can be helpful. But even with that, you have to be really careful. And I still think you have to double check with an actual human to be like, is this correct? So it has a place. As somebody who has done their fair share of checking or looking at trials of AI translations, generally speaking, having to check an AI translation is like starting from scratch. So I'm not super keen on them. They're more exhausting than anything.
Yeah, I think just to echo a lot of what Amy was saying, there's a lot of companies out here pitching things to other companies. There's a lot of big publishers, really major Japanese publishers are funding these AI translation companies. I think it's coming from the Japanese publisher end. A lot of them are pushing for that. And that's just like a reality that's been happening. A lot of the in-house staff, like Amy, like Melanie, all of us, in-house staff who could read the English, who work with the language, the material, love the manga. We are fighting all the time. There's a lot of fires, there's a lot of fighting. Not fighting, like beating each other up. Could just be like a comment that you really want people to hone in on. It's a lot of, I guess, a lot of office politics, a lot of trying to maneuver how people feel about it, because just the feeling about AI is just very different. Like between America, like what a lot of what's going on, conversations in America, conversations going on in Japan, just very different. It's sort of how NFTs had a very different, divergent sort of like conversation, I feel like, between both countries. That's just like we play it again on the Japan side. So I think it's a reality that we've just had to face more recently. And I think in general we tend to be overworked, and so it could be an added layer in terms of challenges of stress. You're in a weird situation where you have a lot of demand for cost to go down, but for people to still buy the manga for high quality, but also they keep wanting rates to go down. The math is very difficult. I don't understand. It should not be that complicated of math to try to figure out the rate situation, but you can only do so much when you're only given so much budget. So that's the current reality of challenges that are going on the Japan end. I'm sure on the US side they have, I do know, not just restricted to Japanese publishers, like to manga publishers, but I think like just literary publishers, like book publishers, are grappling a lot with AI stuff as well. So I think we're just in the interesting situation where Japanese publishers themselves are investing into it pretty heavily. So yeah, I just wanted to like touch on that a little. That's a challenge. That's going on. So the next point could be localization versus translation. Like if you guys had thoughts, approaches, things about that. And then I think the last topic would be general advice to people who want to work into the industry. Amy, Melanie, either you want to jump in. I know Venta tends to have a very specific sort of stance or style guide situation in terms of how to handle localization and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess I can start then. The style guide that I took over was written by people 10 plus years ago. And I feel like it used to be very much the industry standard. Actually, really quick first, I'm going to give the difference between localization and Okay, so essentially they're the same thing, but the difference is translation is just the process of changing something from the source language to the target language. That's all there is to it. Localization is the process of slightly altering the translation in a way that makes it understandable to the source audience, rather than just a direct one-to-one into the source language. This is almost always necessary to some degree, because if I translated it directly from Japanese, it's not gonna make any sense. It's not gonna make any sense to anybody, except for maybe the AI bros that are like, yes, one-to-one, good job. That's something that's always in the back of your mind when you are working on a translation, is at what level do I have to localize something to make it actually important to the target, or important, understandable to the target audience. The stance that actually used to be really common, I'm sure that everybody knows the jelly donut, for instance. Do you want the jelly donut from Pokemon? I think it was.
Yeah.
Where they localize, the onigiri into a jelly donut, which is a choice. And at this point, a delicious jelly filled donut. Like at this point, it's commonly seen as an unbelievably silly localization choice. But at the time, that was the industry standard. Like that understandability was a lot more important than keeping the cultural aspect intertwined, especially for something like Pokemon, where it's for a general audience. It's not really for otaku. So for the longest time, Renta's stance was that industry standard hard localization kind of rule. And it was in the style guide. I didn't really think that much of it. We just like would rewrite the style guide, and then we would look at people's feedback. We have a tendency to scroll Twitter very frequently. In Japanese, it's called egosa, when you're looking for what people are saying about your company. So we do that kind of thing, and we base like that. We consider that feedback as well. So if people have something negative to say about this, and then you have to sift back and forth of what is just personal preference and what is an actual trend. So we have to do like a lot of that kind of stuff. And so for the longest time, we do the hard localization rule of switching the names so that we use the first name. That one is a bit middling because some people prefer it. Funny enough, the Japanese side actually generally prefers it. That's why a lot of manga will, when they give us our name, their name from the publisher, they want it switched because we actually use the names that they request. So even on the Japan side, it's yes, use the first name. That's like the obvious choice because it's for a Western audience. However, the more you interact with, like for me, it was Renta's audience, is we have a largely otaku audience. We don't have a general audience. So when you switch between the audiences, the level of localization shifts. So when you're going into an otaku audience, they already know a lot. They know senpai, they know kohai, they know like all of these Japanese words, they know san, chan, kun, et cetera, et cetera. So they actually don't like it when you move them because it kind of alters the cultural context that they already know all about, and they don't like it. So over the last year or so within the team, there's been a lot of conversations about at what point are we over localizing stuff in a way that our audience actually doesn't like it. So we've been rewriting our style guide a lot based off of that. So anyone who is interested in localization stuff, look out for that in whatever changes you decide to make. But it's stuff like one of the big ones that I can just be like open about is that like we used to localize foods. So I don't know how many people know what taiyaki is. It's a little fish. Actually, I'll just tell you what we had to localize it into. It's a sweet red bean fish shaped pancake. So but when you see somebody say that line, it is what taiyaki, it's not wrong. It's so long and it's so unnatural and it takes people out of the enjoyment of reading the translation. So we finally opted to stop localizing words like that under the context of if I can Google it and it's the first thing that pops up, just use the Japanese word. It's just going to sound more natural. Like even something like oyakodon, it sounds so strange. What is it like? Mother-child bowl, rice bowl. Yeah, so we have had a kind of shifting over time tendency to localization decisions.
I don't have too much to add on. I guess I'll talk a little bit about Animate International's style, I guess. Of course, like as Emma mentioned, all three of us live in Japan, so I do feel a little bit out of the loop of like how much Japanese culture do native English speakers like in America and Canada actually know. So thankfully, most of the translators we hired were like based in the US. If they determined something needed a translator's note, I try to keep it in. They were just like, oh no, everyone in America knows what that is. I'd be like, okay, it doesn't need a translator's note because I can't really judge because I know basically everything. I don't know if anyone else would. Yeah. So I left the big decisions like that to the translators because I can't really say I've lived in Japan since 2011 and I've been back to Canada once in that time. I'm from Canada and I've been to like the US to go to Anime Expo. I haven't really left since I've come here. So I'm not in the loop necessarily, but try to keep myself informed. I do read a lot of English translated manga from other companies to see what they did. And I try to keep up with the Twitter discourse and see what's going on there. But yeah, like Amy said, I think most people who are reading English translations of manga are already otaku and they already know basic things. And of course, when I lived in Canada, I had my own manga collection and even 15, 20 years ago, people were still, or like Tokyo Pop and those companies are still using like San and Chan and that kind of thing. And they were still doing stylized subtitles. The SFX were considered part of the art. So I already, as a fan, had feel for those kind of things. And then when I did have to start making English versions of the manga for my company, it was just catching up with like how trends have changed in 15, 20 years. I don't know. It's been that long. So it's nice that like Amy has a team of native English speakers to go over decisions together because a lot of things I'm just on my own. I'm like, is it right? I don't know. And then I'll do something and then they'll leave feedback like, oh, why'd you do that? I'm like, oh, yeah, I thought it was good and there's no way for me to yeah, I don't know. That's my thoughts on it. Do you have any thoughts, Emma?
Oh, I think like outside of work, I actually read a lot of Korean webtoons and like novels in translation just to get an idea of what sort of other mediums are like handling, especially like food. It's really interesting to see how different places handle food. And it really does seem to be a wide, across different like novels, webtoons, TV shows even. There seems to be a very wide breadth of how people choose how much knowledge they're assuming on the audience's part. With webtoons, they really keep the, like in Japanese, like the Kohai Senpai, they keep the Korean equivalent in the webtoon itself. I find like it doesn't bother me actually as a reader, so I understand from a reader perspective, having additional knowledge is not necessarily a bad thing and things like that. So assuming more that the reader knows is, as Amy mentioned, a changing aspect of the industry. I know, so right now at Manga Planet, especially for our futekiya line, for when we're making things into print, we do go back and make some small changes here and there for the print edition. So like we have City Light's birthday coming out, and there's a scene that talks about takoyaki, right? I think recently isekai, takoyaki, I think okonomiyaki were added to the dictionary. I think I can't remember which dictionary it was, or the encyclopedia or something. Like these words are entering mainstream language. It is like an evolving thing, and a style that you had in the past could like change to just how audiences are changing as well. And so instead of the octopus dumplings that we had in the past, we just change it back to takoyaki for the print edition, just because we figured that it's in the dictionary. People could look it up. It doesn't look like a dumpling per se, but people assume, so it probably caused like a cognitive dissonance in a way. There's a certain level of like, we could assume the reader can look things up. Culture is changing. Japanese food is a lot more commonplace nowadays than it was 15 years ago. I think it is an interesting balancing act, I guess, of trying to find the right like point in which you could have certain words and not certain words to alienate a new audience and things like that. I think we'll probably see more words entering the dictionary of common usage as well in the future. But yeah, so that's it on the localization versus like is there anything else you guys wanted to add before we move on to what advice you have for aspiring?
Actually, one funny anecdote. Because we were getting more toward this kind of idea of being our oriented audience, our like main audience is more otaku anyway, let's just start implementing more otaku-poi, very centric words. So on our website, we recently added it so you can search in Japanese so that you don't have to know the English title to see if it's on Renta.
That's cool.
Yeah, one of the best things we've implemented recently, honestly, very proud of our team for doing that. Because they originally had it as like English title, Japanese title, and then in kanji, Nihongo. And I was like, if they can't read the Japanese already, they're not going to know what Nihongo is. So I was like, so can you change the Japanese to Romaji, and then change the other one to just Japanese? And I was sure that everybody would know what Romaji is, because I feel like most otaku, they've dealt with the Romaji title before. But after reassuring the Japanese staff over and over, just use Romaji, it's fine, everyone understands what it means, instantly we got a customer complaint. I was like, what the heck is Romaji? I'm like, yeah, so I'm like, oh God, they're probably side-eyeing me. See, they don't know what it is.
I guess maybe because when you're a Japanese language learner, the concept of Romaji is introduced pretty early on.
Right.
Yeah.
I know the way I reassured them was that I feel like the people who don't know what Romaji is probably don't really have a use for the Romaji in Japanese titles anyway, so that area is not even really for them. It's more for the people who are trying to find a title that they already know is in Japanese, but are like searching for it elsewhere. But yeah, I was like, oh man, was I wrong about that? Is Romaji not as common as I thought it was?
That's good that they added that feature. So we're going to do advice. So advice that you have for people aspiring to work in Japan, I guess, also in-house.
I thought of some advice for if you're an aspiring like manga translator or typesetter or editor. I think if you're an aspiring manga translator, of course study Japanese, but also focus on creative writing as well, because a lot of the like translations that I talked about that hit were like ones that were creative, like ways of phrasing things that were in character voice. And yeah, generally if I can tell which character is speaking just from the text alone, like that's a good translation, I think. So focus on creative writing if you do want to be a translator. Of course study Japanese too, right? Like your target language, obviously. But for creative translation, in addition, you probably need creative writing skills. If you want to be a professional typesetter, I would say up until recently, there wasn't a lot of resources for typesetting specifically Japanese manga into English, because that's very different from typesetting American comic books, and that's very different from typesetting webtoons. But now there's like a ton of resources. Recently, Emma showed me a class on how to typeset like manga into English. So
Yeah.
if you're aspiring typesetter, like study up on that, because me in-house, I can tell you how I want things to look, but I can't really tell you how to do it and how to achieve it. I can just be like, oh, I can like move that there because the tone is like doesn't look really right. And if you don't know how to fix the tone, I also don't know how to fix the tone. So if
Tones
you're a
are the
typesetter,
worst.
even if your editor or somebody gives you kind of bizarre instructions, yeah, everyone in Japan uses typesetting, but I think the correct is lettering. There's a lot of resources now for you to study because I think once you get into the groove, there's a lot of different things that your editors can ask you. You can be able to handle anything and different file formats, anything like that. Yeah, and for editing, I don't know. I guess my main job at Animate International is being an editor, and I guess the advice for that too would just be, yeah, read a lot of different things, make note of what works, make note of what doesn't, and just keep working on perfecting your craft. Yeah, a specific advice for working in Japan, I don't know, get a visa and get a job.
Just do it. Going off of the creative writing thing, like 100 million%, over time it actually became something, because I do the interviews also, in case any of you are looking to be hired. I do the interviews for the Eaglebond staff. I have gotten to the point where I actually literally ask any kind of people who are applying to the position or interviewing for the position, do you have a background in creative writing? Because it's so unbelievably important. Any person off the street, people who learn Japanese, it's a hard language, but lots and lots of people learn it. There's not really anything special anymore about just knowing Japanese. I guess knowing Japanese enough to communicate really effectively in it is one thing, but like everyone knows Japanese. It's really not hard to find people who know Japanese at this point. And the issue is everybody who knows Japanese thinks they are also qualified to be a translator. The thing is, there's two very different types of translating you can do. One of them is localization, like you would use for manga and stuff like that. One of them is like translating law documents. Law documents are going to be a lot easier because you can one-to-one, like a lot more of the language in that. But the most important thing when you're translating a manga is, how do I phrase it? You need to actually be following the full story. You can't just look at a bubble and be like, I think this is what this says, and then look at the next bubble, completely disconnected from what's happened other than that. And we've had many translators in the past who've had that problem where they just translate the bubble and then they translate the bubble and then they translate the bubble. And these people are having a whole conversation. So now the conversation is they're just saying things to themselves. That's not how it works. 100%. And I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the reading lots of stuff, is people who read a lot are usually often very good at writing as well. So 100%, I agree with what Melanie said on that one.
So this is advice. I think this is very basic advice. I touched on it earlier. Don't sacrifice your health. It's very important. I love manga, I love BL. You gotta make sure that you love your health and well-being to a certain extent, I think. It's easy to forget. I think it's also important just to talk to people. Like, I don't know if this is necessarily advice in general, but I think sometimes it's easy to get in the mindset that, like, I have to be the best, or I'm the only person who could do this, or not only person I can do this, but like, I'm by myself. I don't want to like to other people and things like that. But it's good to talk to other people in the industry just to get a sense of what's going on, just like making connection, not networking per se, just like being open to talking to people, communicating, and things like that. I'm grateful to Avi and Melody because they always tolerate me being like, "Hey guys, what's up?" out of the blue. So I think this is weird, but I think Anime International went to like Manga Planet, futekiya things. Was seen, I think, to a general audience, it could be seen as like, we're like enemies in the wild or competing. Like, I guess the companies themselves are competitors in the market, but I think as like employees or workers in general, we do have a lot in common, and being able to talk about common issues, just talk about the struggles and things like that. It's important that we aren't each other's enemies, and I think it's important not to view each other as like enemies per se. You don't need to view other aspiring people as like, taking my job or something like that. It's a human to human like job situation. Being able to talk to people and like, get to know people and just generally be like nice to each other, I think is important. That's some weird advice, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to be like a poly. Everybody needs to get along. No, everybody doesn't need to get along, but I think it's important to just have a certain level of cross-company, cross-industry communication, cross company talking and understanding, as I said, like a lot of AI companies coming in, a lot of demands that we know as just because we know the audience, like that don't necessarily fit. There's a lot of similarities between different companies. Don't be afraid to talk to other people. I do agree with the creative writing. I think on an editor point, so I heard this advice from Jan. Jan Cash is like another editor translator out there. And she recommended like a UC Berkeley course on editing. It's like a sequence of courses that you could take as an extension to UC Berkeley. And so I took that, and that really actually helped me get a better understanding of my role within the whole process. The course is meant for publishing in general, not necessarily manga specific, but there's a lot of overlap, and it's very helpful into just understanding more of your position within the flow of things and how to better support translators and the letters and other people in your staff. Because I view my role as like an editor, at least at my company, it's a mix of project management and also supporting the people to do their job the best they can. And so that course really helped me figure out how to like think about ways to help other people, support them to do their job. So yeah, the UC Berkeley course, I think it does cost a little bit of money. I had to space it out over almost 2 to 3 years, I think. It wasn't a short thing, but it was good. It was a good like kick in the pants, I think. So that's, but there's also a lot of other free resources. I think also Jan wrote a book about, I should look it up, a book about how to do editing for manga specifically. I'll try to find that later if somebody else could find it. And also Wynn's coming up with a comment. So you're all basically wordsmiths, and in that sense, you're all colleagues in a particular field. And people on Twitter have found that networking is very important if you want to keep going in such a work as a lifelong professional. Personal networking is definitely separate from corporate rivals. Yep. Yeah. So thank you, Amy and Melanie, for agreeing to do this panel. It was in the talks for a long time, actually. Out of the blue last summer, I was like, "Hey guys, what do you think about talking in front of other people together?" So I'm very grateful that you guys are willing to talk and share your thoughts and things like that. Did you guys have any other last advice before we open it up for any questions or comments from the audience?
One last advice that's connected to the networking thing is the importance of staying connected to the Western audience, especially if you're like living and working in Japan at a Japanese company. It can become surprisingly hard, surprisingly difficult to stay connected with other Western opinions, other Western trends, all that kind of stuff, because all day in your daily life, you're just surrounded by like Japanese advertisements and Japanese opinions, Japanese TV, Japanese marketing, all of your Japanese colleagues. So it's really easy to lose that Western touch that you need when you're orienting a market toward a Western audience. It goes hand in hand with what I was talking about before with the Oji-san BL. And I'm usually a lot more connected to the Japanese side of the audience because my preferences don't really mesh as well with the Western side when it comes to BL, for instance. And so that actually negatively impacted my job for quite a while in my ability to recommend BL that would actually sell well to our audience, because there's a very big difference between my preferences and what sells well in Japan and what will sell well. Or I don't want to make it all about sales, like what is actually catered and interesting to the market that we are trying to give this product to. So I do think that not even just marketing within the Japanese sphere and stuff, which is still really important and wonderful that Emma always puts those get-togethers, even though I'm antisocial and almost never go. I'm sorry.
No, you a couple of them. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, but just being really sure to keep an eye on what's going on in the West, what are the trends, keeping up, if you can, go back and forth with other American-oriented publishing companies and stuff is really important.
Nice.
But no, I really think it might sound a little bit cheesy, but I really think you've been like a pillar of the localization community in Japan, Emma, because you're putting together, like, as you mentioned in your intro, you're putting together meetups and you organized this talk for us. And really, before I met you, I really thought nobody else in Japan did the same kind of work I did, because as I mentioned, even in my own company, I was the only one in the corner making my books. And I just focused on trying to make the best books that I could. And hopefully they're nice, and I literally had nobody to talk to about it. So it has been really like helpful to hear what's going on at like Renta and the Manga Planet, futekiya, from both of you. And yeah, thank you for organizing the talk today, and thank you both for hanging out with me in real life.
Yeah, it's fun. Really, I don't know. It's yeah. Sorry, all the people watching. Yeah, we do meetup every now and then. If there's any way to make it easier for people currently working in the industry, people wanting to work in the industry, there's a lot of growing pains and there's a lot of pain points. I think so. We're holding it together. I think in a way. But thanks, guys. If anybody wanted to throw in questions, comments, okay. Besides selecting from companies' existing library, so magazines, publishers they own, like Animate, what factors in selecting titles for English? Is there more enthusiasm for current titles, or is there anyone pushing for older titles? Is there a gap of older, sometimes Oddboy titles that are out of print in English, or that might never come out? So Tyrant Falls in Love, or even Song of the Wind and Trees both come to mind. I know New York was a passion project by the employees at Yen Press. Is there any sort of push for that at the companies you work at? Or inversely, if there's really a hot title, a hot new series currently being published that's a hit with the Japanese audience, is there more of a rush to get it out in English, or is there more caution because it might not do well for the English readers? Yep. Okay. So title selection. I guess I could jump in. So a lot of the title selection, it's a lot of back and I'll try to be short. But when we're doing title selection, it's a mix of I come up with the list and then I talk to my other coworkers about it and we figure out the list together and then we bring it to the publishers and then it's negotiated with the publishers. So for when I'm looking at when I'm trying to pick out titles, I look at how it fits into the larger market. There's a certain portion of like my own taste, so occasionally I do throw in a couple of titles that I personally want to push out there and see in the English market, and I think can do well because there is a readership out there. Along with we do get a lot of reader input, so we do get like emails and things like that. So we see it and we take that into consideration. So there's a lot of different factors that go into it. Occasionally, publishers come to us and ask, "Can you put this in English?" And that's an interesting situation because whether or not we think that'll do well or not is like a back and forth as well. So there's a lot of different people. It's not one person necessarily making the decisions. It's a lot of back and forth between multiple parties at any given moment, at least at our end. For older titles, though, I think it's a question of a licensing situation in terms of who owns the license, what does the rights holders feel, and things like that. Because sometimes rights holders have a very particular idea of what they want to do with it, how they feel about it. So it's really title by title situation. For the most part, digitally, we had a lot of older titles, but definitely for longer titles, it's hard to pick up into English just because, especially in print, with each subsequent volume, there could be less sales and things like that. So that's a different consideration about when we're picking out print titles. We take into not only like ability for sales, how it fits in the market, but also how long is the series itself. So that's a multifaceted. I don't know if that really answers the question. If you guys wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I guess I can talk on Renta's end. Essentially, the most important thing that factors into what we license and what we release is relationships with the publishers. Why that's really important with Renta in particular is because there's a lot of publishers that don't really want to license to a digital-only company. As a digital-only employee, I also want the paper book. Like as an otaku, it's just kind of something you want. And like I completely acknowledge that. And for that reason, in this industry, especially on the Western side, where most people who like to read manga are generally hardcore otaku who like to collect. We like to make little nests of all the things we love. So a lot of the bigger publishers don't want to license their content digital only. They would much prefer to sell to a print publisher or a half and half kind of publisher. So what's really important with Renta is that we have a relationship with this company. They know that we're digital only and they're okay with that. So that's where a lot of our licenses come from. And another thing is for the old versus new rentals, for the titles, we generally focus on getting newer titles, not necessarily ones that are the most popular, because sometimes you don't know what's going to take off in the West anyway, just something that seems interesting. But we focus on newer titles for two, I guess, major reasons. One of them is that for old titles, especially if they're popular, they're probably already scanlated. If it's digital only, the chances that people want to pay for it is a lot lower. And so if there's already a free version online, unfortunately, we're just like, it's not worth it for us at this point because they're just going to read the free version instead of the digital version. And it'd be a lot better if a print company picked it up instead. So the people who love it enough to want to buy it, even if they've already read it, can have that physical copy, if that makes sense.
When I worked at Animate and even now at Takeshobo, they basically left the title licensing decisions to me, essentially. But there were a few factors, as Emma and Amy mentioned. There's external or internal even pressure, no matter if you know you're doing this for a company, even if the final decision is up to me, there's still lots of things to consider, like other people's opinions. When I was working at Animate, that was around the time when the credit card processing issue happened. I guess it's still going on too, but there's a lot of card companies, they don't want to process payments for 18 up services. So a lot of the books that Libre and Frontierworks published are would be considered 18 up in the US. Sorry to anyone listening who didn't know that. So there was kind of pressure internally. Choose titles that don't have explicit sexual content. So okay, I would look at all ages titles and choose the ones I like the best. Or there are sometimes, because when I worked at the Anime group, Libre and Frontierworks are so close, they would have their recommendations and I'd heavily consider their recommendations. Sometimes I'd be yes, sometimes I'd be no. But if I said no, they'd come back 6 months later and be like, what do you think about this one? This will be like, no, still no, I don't think that one will work for whatever reason. So yeah, it's just a mix of everything. At Takeshobo, actually, I have selected all the titles we're going to be making into English this year. I have the schedule planned out until December. So I'll be announcing those at the end of the month. And those were a mix of titles that I knew were popular, but don't have official English licenses yet. And then some my boss recommended. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that looks good. And some that, I don't know, just I liked for no reason. So yeah, I don't know. For older titles, yeah, I don't know. It depends. It depends on everything from my perspective.
Yeah. I guess in terms of the next question, we had a shorter question. What's the most tiring part of your job?
It's a lot of work. I don't know. It is physically a lot of work. You have, in my case, checking the translation for accuracy and then checking it to make sure it actually reads well. And then you get it back. And it's a very long process. It can get tiring if you've been doing it for the full 8-hour day. So just the work itself is really rewarding and it's fun. But when it's like hour 10, you're okay, maybe I need to take a break. So I think the work itself can be tiring if you don't manage your time correctly.
Yeah, I think managing my time correctly is the most tiring part. So this is really personal. I know when I'm like peak condition. I know like my brain is on, I can work, and if it's not, then my work will go work because you use a lot of brain power while you're using it. So I gotta make sure I get enough rest basically in order to do my job. And try to do that and try to move everything out to make sure you rest enough so you can do your job is weirdly tiring. It's like counterintuitive actually. That's not a really good answer. Anyway, sorry. That's tiring lately though.
I think, Melanie, you have to commute every day now too, don't you?
Yeah, but it's just like a 10-minute train ride for me. It's kind of nice.
I live an hour away from my office, which is pretty common in Tokyo, but don't get a pet if you move to Tokyo. Your option for apartments goes down to 1%. But for me, the most tiring, because I'm not just an editor, I'm essentially the only person in a leadership position that's also a foreigner. It can get exhausting to constantly be fielding questions about what do Westerners think about this? And then a typo because somebody used ChatGPT to translate something gets on the site, and then I have to go to that group and be like, please fix this. And then I don't know, there's just like a million things happening at once from all sides because I am the token, my team is the token foreigner team. So it's like anything that is front facing, anything that is in English, anything that's oriented toward the Western market, we essentially have to check or have our finger on all of that at all times. And then like on top of that, we also do all the market research stuff, all that kind of stuff. So it's like I'm working 5 jobs in one job. So just keeping track of all of those things while also trying to do my actual job description job at the same time is just unbelievable. I'm at the office alone today because it's Saturday for those who don't know in Japan right now. And I'm relieved because I'm like, I'm not going to get added by anyone. This is going to be great. And then I guess what else? Like the other thing that's exhausting, I guess, as an editor is when you just get a really rough translation and it's really late in the process and it's supposed to go on the site soon. And you get to rewrite the whole thing. that I don't love either. So those two things are probably the most exhausting to me.
Got it. I think just to keep time together. So I want to do the question about the college student interested in entering the industry. And then we have this question I think is a little bit more complicated about the BL market, whether or not we think it's saturated or not, and things like that. So currently a college student interested in entering the industry, apart from creative writing in Japanese, what classes would you recommend? Is there any prerequisite to entering without having a lot of connections? I don't think there's a prerequisite to have connections, honestly.
Yeah, I'd even go as far as to say there's not really any college classes you would have to take necessarily. I would agree with Sarah's answer that she also wrote down in the chat as well. My major in university was psychology with a minor in Japanese. And I only have Japanese N2, but I've been working at fully in-house Japanese companies for 10 plus years because I can speak Japanese okay-ish to get by in a professional setting-ish. I don't know. I think people give me a lot of leeway. But I don't know. I feel like there's not really any, even at Takeshobo too, like when I applied, they're like, we don't need to see your school history. We don't need to see like anything from you. You just need to show up and be able to interview. So maybe that's the answer. I've rambled in my way into the answer is have interviewing skills. And yeah, maybe that's all you really need because I think you can get past any lack of qualifications or lack of professional schooling if you do actually have the skills to do things.
And I would say another thing, much more so than taking specific classes, because as someone who, like I said, does the hiring and the interviewing and stuff like that, I've never looked at the one thing we do, and I think this is very common with all translation companies, is when somebody, I guess, has the qualifications, and the qualifications are really just, and this isn't even a qualification, this is just something I look for. If you love manga, if you put that on your profile, be very clear about your passion for the subject on your resume. Because passion for manga and experience reading manga, experience like understanding, translating, handling manga, like experience within the community and stuff like that is actually going to go a lot farther than taking specific classes. Because I feel like with school, there's a lot of things that even if you take a class on it, it doesn't really mean anything. Sometimes people will come to us and they'll be like, I have scanlation experience. But the thing is, as somebody who has read scanlations in the past, big shock, most people have, a lot of them are wrong. Like the translation is wrong and stuff. So if somebody comes to me and says, I have scanlation experience, that doesn't actually mean anything. So it's much more than experience in the field is what does your social media presence look like? How passionate are you about the subject? That kind of thing stands out to me a lot more than like any kind of specific classes or any kind of specific experiences. But then that you also have to pass the translation test that you're sent. So those are just the two things. A lot of experience translating to the point where you can pass the translation thing, and then just having a very clear and open passion for the stuff that we like are in the industry for, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think this is also going in line with not necessarily a class, but I tend to hire people who cold call me actually, being comfortable, like cold emailing. I'm very open to people just emailing me randomly. It's always interesting to see what people email. Be comfortable just cold emailing people. That's not really a class, I don't think, but don't be like those spammy people either. Be like, hello, like this is my experience. I don't have experience, but if you had a translation test or something, I've hired people who just emailed me like in the past. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. But I think being able to have, what do they call it? Soft skills, communicative, responsive, responding to emails and things like that. But a certain level of professionalism, I think, is generally, I don't think that's necessarily, I don't think there's a college class for that, is it? That level is very much more valuable than you think. I think just being able to send an email within a normal time range, following up on things. I think that's just generally soft skill type things that are important, and I think not valued enough potentially. So that's not really a class, just having a certain level, it's just a follow up and person to person skill, intercommunication skills is actually pretty important. How people react to scan. So this is a question of a lot of publishers I've heard, so for not to mention scanlations, while I understand that it's also woo, I got more professional work. I know it's an open secret of sorts that many people in the industry start on scanlations. I don't know. I think it really depends on the publisher whether or not you want to bring up scanlation. Some publishers don't like it. Some publishers might be okay.
Yeah, I feel mentioning for scanlations, one thing that is like almost better is if you have lettering experience, much more than like translation, because it's easy to prove really good lettering skills through your scanlation work than it is translation skills, because then we have to get out the Japanese one and put it side by side. But one thing I will say, like Emma said, it really depends on the publisher, because some publishers will just outright say, if you've done scanlations, we don't want you, if it's on the resume. But some publishers, it's a positive because it means you obviously have enough passion to have worked on this kind of stuff before.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree with Amy. I was trying to talk around it in my previous answer, but yeah, the only way you can prove you have lettering skills is by showing you've done lettering, which how do you do that if you don't have professional experience? There's only one way to do it.
I guess we could do the next one as our last question, maybe.
Okay, sounds good.
Which one should we do? Reality of... So we have the saturation of the market, reality of the daily job, and then support. Thanks, Usa, for the question. This is my coworker. I was going to say this is my coworker. Like, what areas, in your respective jobs, what areas would you want more support and things like that?
I'll just quickly shout out the question asking about Takeshobo.
Yeah, there's the Takeshobo question. Sorry about that. Yeah, feel free. Go ahead with the Takeshobo question.
Could there be a suggestion box for Takeshobo? Just send me a tweet. I'll see it. I'm the only person in the account. Oh, I like this Takeshobo title. Okay, cool. I don't think I'm allowed to press, but I'll see it. So we don't have any plans to set up a website yet. I think we need to start getting the English releases out there first. But no, for sure, there could be a suggestion box in the future. But for now, just send me a tweet at Takeshobo_en with any titles you'd like to see in English. But again, I have already chosen everything up until December of this year. But 2026, yeah.
Yeah.
What the question would you like to answer, Amy?
The one that caught my eye the most is the BL market, and if it's saturated or not question, I suppose, probably because I like BL manga. But I don't know, what do you guys think?
I think I know the person who asked the question. They know the BL market pretty well, I think. The market has, for between 2019 to now, like a lot of the 7Cs, a lot of the more major players beyond Sublime have now entered the BL markets. I think overall, manga, not just BL, manga overall is pretty saturated in terms of what's being put out there. I think digital, there's just so much out there. I think the untapped market tends to be potentially on the print end, even though print also is quite a crowded. But I do think there's still demand out there. This overall industry thing, I hear a lot of talk about how the cost of printing and the cost of books are probably going to really increase in the coming years, and that potentially might impact what the demand is for print versus the demand for digital. This is a hard question.
In terms of BL specifically, this might sound like me patting my own back or something as an employee of Renta, but one thing that I have said multiple times that I really like working at Renta for is that, like, because we have a lot of trouble licensing these really big titles and stuff like that, because they want there to be a print version, we're able to pick up a lot more content by smaller publishers and stuff like that. And I feel like these smaller publishers are often the kind of forefront where the next wave of the big BL mangaka are coming from. So it's really exciting to work with these people really early on and see the potential in all of these really new kind of debut works. So I do think that there is still an untapped market, especially in print, because print usually focuses a lot more on what's selling really well in Japan and that kind of stuff. In the digital market, maybe because there's less overhead cost and all that kind of stuff, we're able to focus a lot more on all of these like really small publishers that maybe only really niche hardcore fans know about. Of course, sometimes we get really massively popular ones like Yamayade, of course. But we have a ton that I probably wouldn't even have heard of if I wasn't literally working on them. And that's saying a lot because it's all I do all day is like scroll BL Twitter. So yeah, I guess in terms of untapped market, there's definitely a lot of little niche markets, but I don't know, we try to provide as much as we can the lesser known BL mangaka.
Nice. Is there the last things you wanted to say to anybody out there? And thank you everybody for your time watching. I know we went over time a little bit and we couldn't answer all the questions.
Yeah, I guess I kind of want to do some self-promo. I don't know. Thank you. I also did translation at Animate sometimes, and the final book I translated in-house at Animate was Cosmetic Play Lover, Volume 8. So if you've been following along with the Cosmetic Play Lover series, please read Volume 8. I translated it with my 2 hands. It's so lovely, so romantic. I love it so much. Thank you, somebody in the chat. Yes, Cosmetic Play Lover, Volume 8, next week in English. Read it. There's only 2 more volumes till the end. Okay, so it's the Paris arc. So thank you.
Yay!
Yeah, the most recent light novel I've adapted for Seven Seas came out in digital 2 days ago, A Tale of a Secret Saint Zero, Volume 2. They're at the beach. It's the beach arc. That's exciting too. And for Takeshobo, as I mentioned, I have selected the next titles will be coming out in English for Takeshobo. So please follow on Twitter, Takeshobo_EN. And I should be announcing the upcoming slate of releases at the end of this month. So those are the 3 things I like to advertise and recommend. So how about you? I guess Amy.
Yeah, Amy.
I don't have any really like good closing statements because I suck at that kind of stuff, but I have endless BL recs. I can't think of the title off the top of my head, but on the 1st of this month, Taiyo Tosho released, like, it's an Omegaverse title, but it's like not your usual Omegaverse. It's about the kind of difficulties of people who don't create that bond and stuff like that and have to go through life not wanting that and just wanting to live a normal life, even as they're afflicted by being an Omega or something like that. I wish I could remember the title off the top of my head, but it's so good. And it's like got this little goth twink in it. And it's just, please read that one. It's in Japanese still. I'll see if we can get the license, but I can't make any promises. Anyway, for Renta, like actual English ones, one that's coming out tomorrow, is by Asahina Mashiro. It's called The Fox's Favorite, or Kitsune-sama no Yomeiri. It's so good. It's so good. Please read it. It's really cute and it's really heartwarming, especially if for people who like are really stressed from work or have a dead-end job. That's what that manga is about. And please read it. It's very good. Also, another one that's 3 chapters are out is like Reborn as a Character in a Dating Sim by Akimitu in the romanized title. But that one is also very funny and very good. Yeah, anyway, I love BL manga. I really appreciate everyone coming today. Thank you so much, Emma, for hosting.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for helping manage the Zoom situation. Thank you, Lynn, for helping guide everything with SWET. Thank you, everyone. I guess last minute, everybody wanted the Tonari ni Baso. Have no affiliation with it, but I just love it. That's one of my personal favorites we have in print. That's one of our prints that we do. So yeah, those are the 2 things I wanted to push at the end, I guess, in terms of advertising. But thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. SWET is open to members if you want to join. We also have the Manga SIG, like special interest group, which is actually just a Discord group where I obsessively post the news. If anybody wants to join the SIG, feel free to just email the email that's on the SWET website and join SWET, and then tell them that you want to join the manga if you're interested. Instead of making connections with the people in the industry, you're welcome to ask questions and things like that. And I think like Takeshobo and Renta also have their social media things, and maybe there's enough like positive feedback. Maybe we could do a future talk about anything in the future if anybody's interested. So thanks again, and have a good rest of your day, guys. Yeah, thanks.